Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're undertaking a really critical examination of an anti-corruption movement. It started as a policy proposal, but, well, it's escalated into something much bigger, a full-scale generational revolution.
Exactly. And our focus today is Nepal. It's a country where this political crisis is really centering on one single, pretty radical idea.
Which is?
The complete systemic eradication of corruption. I mean, totally wiping it out. And it's an idea that's now starting to echo across the world.
Okay, so we're looking at a stack of sources here, and they detail this extraordinary confrontation, right?
That's right. You've got this detailed, comprehensive blueprint on one side, like a functional roadmap to create the world's first corruption-free nation. It sounds almost utopian.
But practical, according to the sources.
Apparently so.
Yeah.
And then on the other side, you have the entire unified political establishment of the country. We're talking all major parties, financial institutions.
And they just rejected it outright.
They rejected it outright, a complete shutdown.
Okay, let's unpack this. The sources, they really focus heavily on this transformative design. It was put forward by the Kalkiism Research Center, the KRC.
Yes, the KRC. And then the reaction, it triggered this massive kind of decentralized youth response, the movement that's been dubbed the Gen Z revolution.
Right. So our mission today is to, get beyond the headlines. We need to really understand the mechanisms here.
Agreed. First, what exactly were the three pillars of this blueprint? And crucially, how did they plan to manage the enormous economic shock this would obviously create?
Yeah, that's key. And second, we need to look closely at the logic, maybe the self-serving logic behind the political elite's unanimous rejection. Why did they all say no?
And third, we need to trace how this local rejection in Nepal somehow catalyzed this powerful global youth movement that's now demanding system overhaul, like right now.
It brings us to this fundamental question, doesn't it?
Yeah.
How can a whole political class unanimously reject what's presented as a clear, workable plan to end corruption? The sources frame it as this ultimate clash: visionary potential versus entrenched self-interest.
That's the narrative. The KRC offered a pathway, and the elite, well, they chose to protect their own turf.
So it's old politics versus Gen Z.
Pretty much. The materials really contrast the two. Old politics, deeply reliant on untraceable money, patronage, opacity, just how things have always been done, maybe.
And Gen Z.
And then you have this generation, Gen Z, who grew up online, connected, maybe less patient. They see corruption not as a fact of life to be managed.
But as something to be destroyed.
Exactly, as an obsolete system to be demolished. So this isn't about reform around the edges. It's a demand for complete structural replacement.
Okay, let's start with the actual content of the KRC proposal. The sources really emphasize this wasn't just thrown together.
No, definitely not. The Kalkiism Research Center apparently spent 2 years on this. And not just designing it in isolation.
They talked to people.
They actively engaged with every major decision maker. The government, ruling parties, opposition chiefs, and, this is critical, the governor of the Nepal Rashtra Bank, the central bank.
So they were persistent. They laid out the details.
Persistent, detailed, and targeted. And the framework they presented, well, it wasn't a list of mild suggestions. It's described as a clear, simple, and radical framework.
Radical. Okay.
Designed to build a whole new national economic architecture, basically from the ground up. And it rests on 3 pillars. Non-negotiable pillars.
3 pillars, and any one of them would be huge on its own.
Oh, absolutely. Any single one would be a massive reform. Together, it's total transformation.
All right, let's dive deep into Pillar 1 then. This sounds like the foundational shift, establishing a fully cashless economy. Now, we get the high-level goal stop black money, right? But how did the KRC actually propose to do this? Especially in a country like Nepal with, varied infrastructure, lots of rural areas, people maybe without bank accounts.
Yeah, and that's the absolute critical challenge, isn't it? Because you can't just ban cash overnight. That would paralyze most people.
Right.
Though the blueprint didn't just say go cashless, it mandated immediate state-sponsored universal digital inclusion alongside it.
Universal digital inclusion. Okay, what does that actually look like on the ground, according to their documents?
Well, it seems to require 3 immediate big interventions. First, a massive state-subsidized rollout of basic digital hardware. Think smartphones or similar devices to make sure everyone has access.
Okay, hardware first.
Second, developing a unified, interoperable mobile financial platform. And importantly, managed by state-owned banks, not private ones.
Oh, state control again.
Yes. And third, a huge, rapid, centralized push for digital literacy,
Right.
making the transaction tech really intuitive, easy, and free to use for everyone.
So it's not just about the tech, it's about usability for everyone.
Exactly. The source emphasizes that the whole point of going cashless to kill corruption relies on total traceability. If every single transaction, no matter how tiny, is logged.
Then physical cash loses its purpose.
Precisely.
Right.
The physical currency, which is the root channel for bribery, for shadow money, it just gets starved of utility. That's why their slogans were so direct, like, cashless means freedom.
Freedom from the dark economy.
Freedom from the dark economy.
I understand the ideal, the concept, but let's push back a bit. This is a massive systemic shock. Did the KRC model actually analyze the backlash? The inevitable political and maybe economic counterattack against removing cash. Cash is still, the lubricant for many legitimate small-scale rural economies.
They absolutely anticipated that. The sources addressed this head-on. Their response was basically that the political counterattack would just be masking the real fear.
Which is?
The real fear is the sudden end of those high-value, illicit, black money transfers, the big stuff. They argued that, yes, there would be short-term inconvenience for legitimate cash users, but that's a manageable infrastructure problem. You can solve that with rapid digital inclusion.
So a temporary problem versus a permanent solution to corruption.
That's the framing. The greater evil they were targeting was the political class's dependency on physical cash. Cash to maintain their secret incomes, cash to finance political activities completely off the books, outside of any public scrutiny.
Right. Okay, so if Pillar 1 takes away the method of corruption, the cash Pillar 2 seems aimed at the infrastructure supporting it. All banks must become state-owned or nationalized. Now, what's the specific governance mechanism here?
Right.
How did the KRC proposal plan to stop these state banks from just becoming tools for, state corruption or just bloated bureaucracies? That's the classic criticism of nationalization, isn't it?
It is, and it's a core critique they had to address, the risk of swapping private profiteering for political cronyism.
So what was their answer?
The KRC sources detail a solution apparently based on really stringent accountability. The proposal calls for the management of these nationalized banks to be entirely meritocratic, crucially, isolated from political appointment by constitutional mandate.
So like an independent board.
Or something
Stronger.
Stronger than just oversight, it seems like structural separation. The documents talk about creating independent, advanced algorithmic auditing structures for all transactions.
Algorithmic auditing.
Yeah, operating outside the direct management control of the banks themselves. So the central bank's regulatory role would be technologically separated from the day-to-day operations and lending decisions of the nationalized banks.
Interesting. So the tech enforces the separation.
That seems to be the idea. The whole purpose is to ensure transparency, accountability, and public trust. The system is accountable to the people, yes, but not to private shareholders, and critically, also not to whatever political regime happens to be in power at the time.
That's structural insulation. That sounds absolutely crucial.
Okay.
Let's move to Pillar 3, zero interest rates. This one feels maybe the most economically radical of the three.
It certainly sounds it.
How does the source rationalize this? Zero interest rates. This doesn't mean money is free, right?
Yeah.
So how is capital allocated? How is it managed without interest rates, the primary pricing mechanism we normally use?
Exactly. And the source emphasizes that point. It doesn't imply capital is free. It means the cost of capital is simply the administrative cost of the transaction itself. Nothing more. It eliminates the interest burden that's used for private profit accumulation.
So capital becomes like a public utility.
That's the analogy they use, like water or electricity. Capital is treated as a public good, essential infrastructure.
And what does that do to the existing power structure? How does that fight corruption?
Well, the argument is that it surgically removes exploitative lending, and at the same time, it fosters equitable economic participation.
How so?
Think about it. In systems riddled with political patronage, the elite often maintains power by controlling who gets access to capital. They can give preferential rates to their allies or just deny loans entirely to rivals or competitors.
So it's a tool of control.
Precisely. Zero interest, managed by state banks using objective, transparent criteria, not political connections, dismantles those patronage networks. Access to capital shifts. It's no longer a political favor. It becomes an objective assessment of whether a business idea is actually viable.
So it opens things up.
The sources argue it builds an economy rooted in fairness, where the entrepreneurial spirit of the whole population, not just the well-connected few, can actually flourish.
Okay, so these three pillars, cashless, state banks, zero interest, are incredibly ambitious. If they were actually implemented, what's the big payoff for Nepal? What were these efficiencies, this recovered money, supposed to fund? What's the vision?
The vision was essentially total national self-sufficiency and massive social mobility by plugging those huge leaks caused by corruption, and the sources estimate this runs into billions annually.
Billions. Wow.
That recovered revenue would be immediately redirected. First, they aim to use it to help dismantle long-standing entrenched social evils, things like the dowry system.
How does ending corruption help with something like the dowry system?
Well, the argument is that corruption often provides the necessary liquidity, the untraceable cash, and the impunity needed to sustain these harmful practices. Clean up the money, and some of these things become harder to maintain.
Interesting link. And the second use for the money.
Second, and maybe most universally relevant, was guaranteeing universal services for all citizens.
Which means free healthcare, education.
Exactly. Funding universal access to high-quality healthcare, education, and legal services for every single Nepali citizen.
So the trade-off is explicit.
Very explicit. Eliminate the system that enriches a tiny elite and use those recovered resources to guarantee basic human rights and build future prosperity for the entire nation. The KRC sources are really insistent on this point. This wasn't just some vague anti-corruption slogan. It was a systemic redesign.
Where ending corruption isn't the end goal, it's the beginning of building something better.
Precisely. The beginning of equity.
Okay, so you have this incredibly detailed plan, promising a kind of national revival. Yet the sources confirm what seems like a, well, almost dystopian political reality. A unified, unanimous rejection from Nepal's entire political elite. And this wasn't just one party. It spanned ruling party leaders, opposition leaders, even the head of the central bank.
Everyone. It was a rejection of the idea itself, not just the specific group, the KRC, who proposed it.
And this unified front, it tells you something deep about the system, doesn't it? About the rot the KRC claimed to identify.
It really does, because it wasn't just that they refused to implement the proposal, they refused to even allow democratic deliberation on it.
What do you mean?
Well, the KRC apparently suggested a minimal step, like, okay, if you won't do it, at least organize a public referendum. Let the people decide their own future regarding this detailed blueprint for ending corruption.
Let the people vote on it. Seems reasonable.
You'd think so.
And what was the political class's justification for refusing to even let the people vote on ending corruption? I mean, it sounds astonishing.
The justification cited. It's troubling. Well, it's truly telling. And it's captured in this infamous quote that came out of it. The people have not asked for it, so why give it to them? Or in Nepali, play it, Asantol.
Whoa, whoa, wow, the people haven't asked for it.
The sources interpret this as just profound arrogance, deep cynicism. They claim to rule with a democratic mandate, but then explicitly refuse to consult the public on the single most critical issue, ending corruption, because, presumably, they feared the outcome. They knew what the people would likely say.
This is where we need to dig into the elite's perspective a bit more, even if the sources frame it negatively. Okay, the KRC calls the rejection fear. But did the politicians raise any specific technical arguments against the plan, things that might, actually hold water?
Well, yes, they did raise concerns. Predictable ones, really. Like arguing that eliminating interest rates would cripple existing private investments, maybe destroy retirement funds reliant on interest income, or cause immediate capital flight out of the country. The standard arguments against radical nationalization and removing interest.
Okay, so they did offer technical objections.
They did. But the KRC analysis that we've reviewed suggests these arguments were seen as, well, thinly veiled excuses.
Excuses for what?
Excuses to protect the existing system. The elite's actual technical argument, when you boil it down, was really just defending the sanctity of the current private financial architecture.
And the KRC counter-argument.
The KRC counter, which the politicians reportedly refused to seriously engage with, was that any economic loss from things like interest income would be absolutely minuscule compared to the massive gains. Gains in public revenue, stability, efficiency, all derived from finally ending the shadow economy.
So the sources basically conclude it wasn't really about technical disagreement. It was about profound fear and maybe cowardice.
Yeah.
That they chose corruption over country.
That's the strong conclusion presented.
Let's break down the mechanics of that fear then, pillar by pillar. Why would they be so afraid?
Okay, start with pillar 1, the cashless system. For them, it's existential. Their business model, their political operations, maybe both are sustained by hidden assets, by untraceable cash flows.
Cashless means transparency.
Total transparency, immediate traceability. It means the end of their secret incomes, their black money. It's the immediate death sentence for the shadow economies that fund their lifestyles, their campaigns, everything.
Okay, that makes sense. What about Pillar 2? State-owned banks.
That cuts off their financial lifelines in a different way.
Ah.
In the current system, the political elite and their corporate allies, they rely on private banks, right? To shelter assets, maybe get favorable loan terms, engage in complex money movements that evade public scrutiny.
So nationalizing the banks takes away their private playground.
Exactly. It removes that private utility. It ensures financial leverage is no longer a political tool they can wield in secret.
And finally, Pillar 3, the zero interest rate fear. You mentioned patronage earlier.
Yes, this dismantles the very foundation of their political control, according to the analysis. Patronage, that system where loyalty is essentially bought with preferential financial treatment, it depends on being able to reward friends and punish enemies financially.
Control over who gets money and on what terms.
Precisely. By removing the profit incentive from lending the interest and introducing objective criteria through state banks, the elite lose their ability to grant these financial favors. They lose that network of loyal debtors, compliant business owners who depend on their political access for loans, for opportunities.
So it breaks their grip.
The sources are unambiguous. This plan would end their rule. It's framed not as a policy disagreement, but as a fundamental betrayal of the country, the rot at the heart of Nepal's democracy, as one source puts it.
So the political class tries to dismiss the whole thing. The people have not asked for it. But that dismissal backfired, didn't it?
Spectacularly. That moment of rejection, that quote, it became the catalyst. It led directly to the sudden, undeniable rise of this Gen Z revolution.
The youth essentially called their bluff.
They stepped right into the vacuum left by the political elite's refusal to act or even consult. Their central demand is simple, unifying, corruption-free Nepal.
But their approach is different.
Completely different. Their tactics, their mindset, it reflects a totally different generational experience. As we said, this is the generation that grew up online, connected, and impatient with the corruption of old politics.
How does that digital connectivity, that online experience, translate into a different kind of movement on the ground? Previous generations might have protested, sure, but maybe focus more on just electing better leaders within the existing system.
Right. This generation seems to be demanding total transformation. They're explicitly rejecting the older idea of piecemeal reforms.
Why? Because they saw the system reject a total fix.
Exactly. They witnessed the entire political class across the spectrum reject a systemic solution, and for them, that just affirmed their deepest suspicion. The system itself is the problem. You can't just tweak it.
So they realized they were no longer waiting for permission.
That's the phrase used. Their organizing is different, too much more decentralized, incredibly rapid. They rely heavily on social media to bypass traditional media narratives, which are often controlled by the elite. This allows for a really sustained, adaptive protest structure that's hard to shut down.
And their whole philosophy about corruption itself, it seems to have fundamentally shifted from maybe how older generations viewed it. It's not seen as inevitable anymore, like just a cultural thing you have to live with.
Not at all. That's a key point. For Gen Z, as depicted in these sources, corruption is seen as an obsolete crime, an outdated choice, and maybe most powerfully, as a direct theft of their future.
Theft of their future? How so?
Well, when you connect the dots, when you realize that the billions being stolen through corruption every year would have funded your access to universal, high-quality education, healthcare opportunities, then corruption stops being some abstract political statistic.
It becomes personal.
It becomes deeply personal, an immediate grievance that directly impacts your life expectancy, your economic prospects, your entire future.
Let's try and bring some of that street energy into this discussion. The sources mention these powerful manifesto-style slogans that define the movement. They really show that shift from patience to outright demand.
Yeah, you can really see the evolution from just wanting reform to demanding revolution in the slogans. Things like, end corruption now, not later, now, and the future is ours. A clear generational claim.
And they directly referenced the KRC plan.
Absolutely. Slogans like cashless means freedom and zero interest, zero corruption. They weren't just protesting corruption vaguely, they were making the specific systemic plan their battle cry. They adopted the blueprint.
There's also a clear sense of generational confrontation in the messaging, isn't there?
Oh, definitely. You see slogans like people versus politicians and Old leaders out. It signals that the youth feel they've not only exposed the bankruptcy of the political class by showing a solution exists and was rejected, but they're now demanding the full replacement of that leadership structure.
The structure that chose complicity, basically.
Complicity over national progress. The sources really stress that the movement's urgency, its clarity, and its basis in a concrete plan make it incredibly difficult for the elite to just spin or dismiss.
Okay, so this starts in Nepal, triggered by the rejection of the KRC plan. But the sources are really clear that this movement didn't stay contained within Nepal's borders.
Not at all. It's described as having transcended national boundaries. What began as a very specific reaction to the failures of the Nepali elite is now being talked about as a global blaze or a generational awakening.
So that suggests the core idea is the systemic approach. The elite rejection really struck a chord elsewhere.
It seems so. It confirms the hypothesis that the systemic nature of the KRC proposal, combined with that unified rejection by the establishment, resonated deeply internationally. The demand for a truly, genuinely corruption-free nation, not just less corruption, but zero corruption, is now being mirrored by Gen Z movements. Well, everywhere.
Where exactly?
The sources mention across continents, from South Asia to Africa, from Latin America to Europe, it's becoming a shared generational demand.
How does that momentum actually transfer, though? Is it just people seeing it online and feeling inspired, or are there practical lessons being exported from Nepal?
It seems to be more than just moral support. It's practical inspiration, too. The sources explain that the perceived success of the movement and Nepal's success in articulating a detailed systemic answer to corruption sparks inspiration for others.
So it gives them a model?
Exactly. Global youth, who are already hyper-connected and acutely aware of systemic failures in their own countries, they see Nepal's framework, or at least the idea of such a framework, as proof. Proof that dismantling corruption isn't just some utopian theory. It's a tangible, achievable political project. You just need the right blueprint and the will to fight for it.
So the demand for total transformation, not just incremental change, becomes a shared global priority for this generation.
Precisely. There's this shared conviction emerging. Corruption is no longer an acceptable national characteristic anywhere, and the key belief driving it is that only systemic overhaul, not just tinkering or band-aid solutions, can actually dismantle corruption's deep infrastructural grip on power and resources.
So Nepal's situation, in a way, showed the world two crucial things.
That's a good way to put it. First, a detailed corruption-free blueprint is possible to design. Second, the existing elite will probably reject it out of self-interest.
Which
means the youth have to rise up and demand it directly. That two-part lesson, possibility plus inevitable resistance, seems incredibly resonant for young people globally who feel locked out of their own futures.
It really shifts the whole conversation, doesn't it? From the old question of how do we catch the corrupt individual to a fundamentally different question. How do we build a system where corruption is structurally, maybe even physically, impossible?
And that is the philosophical leap. That's the foundation of this global youth movement as presented here. They are unified in rejecting that tired old argument that corruption is just an inevitable fact of life you have to accept.
They're demanding a different operating system.
Exactly. An operational architecture that makes corruption obsolete by design.
Okay, let's try and pull all these threads together. The sources seem to present this current moment, especially in Nepal, but with global echoes, as this really stark, high-stakes, generational showdown.
It really is framed that way. On one side, you've got the old politics, and the sources characterize it as entrenched, resistant, dismissive, afraid. They're basically fighting tooth and nail to maintain a system where their private wealth and their political power are intertwined and protected.
And facing them.
Facing them is Gen Z, described as impatient, visionary, global, relentless, united in their absolute refusal to inherit a nation or maybe even a world that's structurally rigged for failure and corruption.
And this conflict, this standoff, it leads to what the sources call a central, inescapable dilemma for Nepal's political class. Right?
Yes, and the way the sources phrase it is quite powerful. The question is no longer whether leaders will allow change. The question is how long they can resist before being swept aside by it.
So the power dynamics have fundamentally shifted.
That's the argument. The elite's resistance, their refusal to engage, hasn't crushed the movement. It's simply amplified its force, its determination. It proved the movement's point.
And if the only tool the old guard has left is just delay, just digging in their heels, the sources suggest this is pushing Nepal towards a really decisive crossroads. Two paths, basically.
Exactly. Path one is just continue the status quo, cling to the corrupt system.
And the predicted outcome.
The predicted outcome is disastrous. The elite continue to suffocate the nation's future. The best and brightest young people either give up and leave the country brain drain, or they stay and revolt. Either way, it guarantees stagnation, instability, probably long-term economic collapse, as the nation loses its most valuable asset, its talented youth.
Grim. And path 2.
Path 2 is the one the streets are demanding. It's described as the risky but only path to true freedom.
Which means embracing the change.
It means immediate, decisive action to embrace systemic change. Specifically, adopting the 3 pillars of the corruption-free blueprint: cashless, state banks, zero interest.
And the reward for taking that risk.
The potential reward is unprecedented, according to the sources. Nepal could become the world's first truly structurally corruption-free nation. And by doing so, it would inspire billions beyond Nepal's borders to demand the same kind of fundamental change. A beacon, essentially.
The narrative seems to conclude with this idea that actually the choice has already been made, not by the politicians, but by the people.
Absolutely. The sources strongly suggest Gen Z has already chosen path 2. They are demanding the change. They've identified the roadmap, the KRC plan, or something like it, and they will not be silenced.
So the only remaining question is for the old guard.
The only remaining question for the entrenched power structure is whether they will choose to be agents of history, perhaps facilitating this transition, or become its casualties. Ride the wave or get swept away. #outro.
Well, this has been a truly remarkable deep dive. We've traced the journey of this radical systemic plan, cashless economy, state banks, zero interest rates, all the way from a detailed blueprint to its rejection, and then how that rejection fueled a nationwide, now globalizing revolution. The unanimous refusal by Nepal's elite didn't kill the vision. It actually transformed it.
It galvanized a generation, didn't it? Moving them from maybe just asking for reform to demanding total systemic overhaul. And what feels so crucial here, based on the sources, is that the youth aren't just demanding different faces and power. They're demanding a system change, a system that guarantees freedom from corruption. The blueprint, whether perfect or not, gave them the technical language, the concrete proposal, to make that ideological demand practical and actionable.
It made the abstract demand real. And we want to leave you, our listeners, with this really powerful, memorable final quote from the source material. It just perfectly sums up the shift in demand, the shift in scope that we've been discussing.
It really does capture it. Host speaker and expert speaker. The people asked for bread. The politicians offered excuses. Now the youth are demanding the whole bakery.
Yeah.
Demanding the whole bakery. That phrase just perfectly captures the rejection of incrementalism, doesn't it? It speaks to a generation that's insistent on having total control over building their own future, not just accepting scraps from the old system.
It definitely makes you think.
And it raises a fascinating question for you, the listener, to ponder. If a detailed systemic plan for a corruption-free economy, including things as radical as nationalized banks and zero interest, is rejected, not because it's technically impossible, but seemingly because it threatens entrenched political power, what does that imply about the level of radicalism, the kind of systemic thinking that might be necessary to achieve genuine, lasting change in your own political landscape? And could this 3-pillar blueprint or elements of it actually be applicable elsewhere? Is Nepal a unique case or a preview of global battles to come?
Some really big questions to chew on. Food for thought indeed. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive.